She sat alone in the kitchen, holding a crumpled piece of paper drawn by a child's trembling hand. No one had spoken to her all morning. Not a single good morning, not a glance, only the silence, and the strange, haunting feeling that today was different. Upstairs, laughter echoed, but not for her. And in the quiet, something else stirred, something that had been hiding in plain sight all along. A young boy, often overlooked and barely understood, was the only one who noticed. His eyes saw everything, even what the adults refused to see. And when his drawings began to change, no one paid attention. No one, except her. What was he trying to say? And why did his silence suddenly feel so loud? If you're ready to feel something powerful, stay with us. Follow the channel, like the video, and tell us where in the world you're watching from. This story will stay with you long after it ends. Dorothy Allen's trembling fingers clutched an empty pill bottle as she sat alone at the kitchen table in her son's suburban home in Peoria, Illinois. The morning sun filtered through the gingham curtains she had sewn herself 20 years ago, but the warmth couldn't reach the cold knot growing in her chest. The digital clock on the microwave read 7:13 a.m., and nobody had offered her coffee. It was as if she had become invisible in her own family's home. The silence was broken by her daughter-in-law's sharp voice echoing from upstairs. "Charles, either you choose between her and our peace, or you'll end up alone with that old woman in your arms." Naomi's words cut through the morning air like broken glass, each syllable dripping with venom that Dorothy had grown accustomed to over the past 3 years. Dorothy didn't respond. She never did anymore. What was the point? At 74, after raising 3 children and working as a nurse for 42 years, she had learned that some battles weren't worth fighting. But the empty pill bottle in her hands told a different story. Her heart medication, her blood pressure pills, her arthritis relief, all gone, thrown away like yesterday's newspaper. The only presence that brought any light to her increasingly dark days was Liam, her 6-year-old grandson. The boy had been diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder when he was 3, and while he rarely spoke, his eyes held a depth that seemed to see straight into people's souls. He understood things that adults missed, felt emotions that others overlooked. In a house where Dorothy felt like a ghost, Liam was the only one who still saw her as human. That morning, before the yellow school bus honked outside, Liam had quietly placed a drawing on the kitchen table beside Dorothy's empty coffee cup. The crayon artwork showed a woman with silver hair, just like Dorothy's, sitting at a table with tears streaming down her face. Above her head, a large red X was drawn over what looked like a pill bottle. In the corner of the construction paper, written in Liam's careful, shaky handwriting, were the words, "Grandma need this." Dorothy had pressed the drawing against her chest, feeling her grandson's love radiating from every crooked line and smudged color. In that moment, she realized Liam had been watching. He had seen what was happening to her, even when the adults in the house chose to look away. The sound of Naomi's heels clicking down the hardwood stairs made Dorothy's stomach tighten. Her daughter-in-law appeared in the doorway, perfectly put together in her real estate agent blazer, blonde hair smoothed back in a professional bun. To anyone else, Naomi looked like the picture of success and composure, but Dorothy had learned to read the cold calculation behind those blue eyes. "Oh, Dorothy," Naomi said with mock sweetness, noticing the empty pill bottle. "You know how clumsy you've been lately. I found all those old medications scattered across your bathroom floor this morning. They must have fallen when you had one of your episodes." Dorothy's hands began to shake. She knew she hadn't dropped anything. She'd been careful with her medications. They were the only things keeping her heart beating steadily, her blood pressure from spiking, her joints from screaming in pain. "I threw them all away, of course," Naomi continued, adjusting her pearl earrings with theatrical concern. "Some of those bottles were so old, and with your memory problems, I couldn't risk you taking the wrong dosage. Charles and I have been so worried about you." The lie hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Dorothy wanted to scream, to defend herself, to call Naomi out for the manipulation. But when she opened her mouth, only a whisper came out. Those were keeping me alive." Naomi's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and predatory underneath. She leaned closer to Dorothy, close enough that the older woman could smell her expensive perfume, mixed with something that reminded her of antiseptic and decay. "Maybe it's time you stopped fighting so hard to stay," Naomi whispered, her voice barely audible. "Descanse para sempre, sua velha maldita." The Portuguese words, "Rest forever, you damned old woman," hit Dorothy like a physical blow. Naomi had grown up in a Brazilian household before being adopted by an American family, and she only spoke Portuguese when she wanted to hide her true feelings. But Dorothy had worked in hospitals for decades, treating patients from every background. She understood more than Naomi realized. Dorothy didn't cry. She couldn't give Naomi that satisfaction. Instead, she slowly rose from her chair, Liam's drawing still clutched in her arthritic fingers, and walked toward the staircase. Each step felt like climbing a mountain, her joints protesting without the medication that had been sustaining her. As she reached the top of the stairs, Dorothy heard Naomi making a phone call in the kitchen. "Yes, Dr. Martinez. This is Naomi Patterson. I'm calling about my mother-in-law, Dorothy Allen. I'm concerned she may be having some cognitive issues." Dorothy's blood ran cold. She pressed herself against the wall, listening as Naomi painted a picture of an elderly woman becoming dangerous to herself and others, someone who needed professional care away from the family home. The lies flowed from Naomi's mouth like poison from a snake. In her bedroom, the small guest room she'd been moved to after Charles married Naomi, Dorothy sat on the edge of her narrow bed and stared at Liam's drawing. The little boy had seen everything. He had witnessed Naomi's cruelty and tried to communicate it in the only way he knew how. Dorothy smoothed the wrinkles from the construction paper and made a decision that surprised even her. She wasn't going to die quietly in this house. She wasn't going to let Naomi erase her like an unwanted stain. And most importantly, she wasn't going to let her grandson grow up thinking that evil could triumph simply because good people stayed silent. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across her small room, Dorothy Allen, former trauma nurse, mother, grandmother, survivor, began to plan. For the first time in 3 years, she felt a spark of the woman she used to be flickering back to life. Outside her window, she could see the school bus bringing Liam home. The little boy who saw everything, who drew pictures instead of speaking words, who loved her when no one else seemed to remember she was worth loving. Dorothy pressed Liam's drawing against her heart and whispered a promise to the empty room. "I'm not giving up, baby boy. Grandma's going to fight." In the kitchen below, Naomi continued her phone conversation, unaware that the old woman she was trying to destroy had just found her reason to survive. The old house on Maple Street held secrets in every corner, and Dorothy Allen was finally ready to uncover them. 3 days had passed since Naomi had thrown away her medications, 3 days of pretending to be the frail, confused old woman her daughter-in-law wanted everyone to believe she was. But when Charles left for his accounting firm, and Naomi departed for her real estate showings, Dorothy transformed into someone she hadn't been in years, a detective in her own home. The wooden stairs to the attic creaked under her weight as she climbed, each step a small victory over the arthritis that wanted to keep her bedridden. The air up there smelled like dust and memories, filled with boxes that hadn't been opened since Charles moved her into this house after Richard's funeral. Her late husband's belongings sat in neat stacks, organized by Naomi, with the cold efficiency of someone disposing of unwanted inventory. Dorothy's fingers trembled as she opened the first cardboard box labeled Richard's papers in Naomi's precise handwriting. Inside, she found treasures she thought had been lost forever. Love letters Richard had written her during his deployment in Vietnam, photographs from their honeymoon at Niagara Falls, and the deed to their first home in Springfield. Each item felt like finding pieces of her soul that had been scattered to the wind. But beneath the stack of yellowed photographs, her fingers brushed against something unexpected, a manila envelope that made her heart skip a beat. It was addressed to Charles in Richard's distinctive handwriting, but the envelope had never been opened. The postmark was from 3 years ago, just 2 weeks before Richard's death. Across the front, in her husband's shaky handwriting from his final days, were words that made Dorothy's blood run cold. "Open only when your mother is in danger." Dorothy stared at the envelope, her mind racing. Richard had known something. In his final weeks, when the cancer had ravaged his body but left his mind sharp as ever, he had seen something that worried him enough to write this letter. Something about Naomi. Something about the danger Dorothy would face. The sound of a car door slamming in the driveway sent panic through Dorothy's chest. She quickly stuffed the envelope into her cardigan pocket and began climbing down from the attic, moving as fast as her aching joints would allow. By the time Naomi's heels clicked through the front door, Dorothy was sitting innocently in the living room, pretending to watch her afternoon soap opera. "How are we feeling today, Dorothy?" Naomi asked, with that syrupy, sweet voice that never reached her eyes. I hope you're not overexerting yourself. Dr. Martinez called back about your condition. Dorothy's heart pounded, but she kept her expression neutral. I'm fine, dear. Just watching my stories. Later that evening, when Liam returned from school, Dorothy noticed something different about her grandson. The little boy seemed more agitated than usual, his normally calm demeanor replaced by an urgent energy she'd never seen before. While Naomi prepared dinner and Charles worked late at the office, Liam approached Dorothy with a new drawing. This one was different from the others. It showed the house from the inside like a cross-section of a dollhouse, but what made Dorothy's breath catch were the details Liam had included. Arrows pointing to specific rooms, objects marked with red X's, and most disturbing of all, a figure that looked like Naomi standing over a bed where someone lay very still. Liam pressed the drawing into Dorothy's hands and whispered something so quietly, she almost missed it. Bad lady hurt grandma. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears as she realized her grandson had been trying to warn her all along. His drawings weren't just the random artwork of a child with autism. They were detailed observations of danger that only he seemed to recognize. When Naomi came into the living room to collect Liam for dinner, she immediately noticed the drawing in Dorothy's hands. Her face went pale for just a moment, before the mask of concern slipped back into place. Liam, honey, you know Daddy doesn't like it when you draw scary pictures, Naomi said, reaching for the paper. But Dorothy clutched it protectively against her chest. He's just being creative, Dorothy said firmly. Children see the world differently than we do. That night, after the house had grown quiet and everyone had gone to bed, Dorothy sat in her small room with Richard's unopened letter in one hand and Liam's warning drawing in the other. The pieces of a terrible puzzle were beginning to come together, and she realized that her fight for survival was about to become much more complicated than she had ever imagined. Through her bedroom window, she could see the neighbor's house, where Mrs. Henderson's kitchen light still glowed warmly. Real life was happening all around her, while inside this house, something dark and dangerous was growing like a cancer. Dorothy tucked both the letter and the drawing into her Bible, the one place she knew Naomi would never think to look. Tomorrow, she would have to make some very difficult decisions about what came next. Mrs. Sarah Halverson had been working with special needs children for 15 years at Lincoln Elementary School in Peoria, but she had never encountered a student quite like Liam Patterson. The 6-year-old boy rarely spoke, preferring to communicate through his intricate drawings that revealed a level of observation most adults couldn't match. What concerned her most wasn't his autism. She had worked with many children on the spectrum. It was the increasingly disturbing nature of his artwork. The special education classroom was quiet that Tuesday morning, as Liam sat at his designated corner desk, completely absorbed in creating another drawing. Mrs. Halverson watched him work, noting how his small fingers gripped the crayons with intense focus, his tongue slightly poking out in concentration. When he finished, he carefully walked the paper to her desk without making eye contact, as was his usual routine. This drawing made Mrs. Halverson's stomach drop. It showed an elderly woman with silver hair, the same woman who appeared in all of Liam's recent artwork. But this time, she was at the bottom of a staircase, her body twisted in an unnatural position. Above her, a younger woman with blonde hair stood at the top of the stairs, her arms extended as if she had just pushed someone. Liam, Mrs. Halverson said gently, kneeling down to his eye level. Can you tell me about this picture? The little boy looked at her with those penetrating dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets far too heavy for a child. He picked up a red crayon and wrote in shaky letters at the bottom of the paper, Naomi push grandma. Mrs. Halverson felt her professional training kick in. As a mandated reporter, she had seen signs of abuse before, but this felt different. This felt urgent. She gathered all of Liam's recent drawings from his portfolio, dozens of them, all featuring the same elderly woman in various states of distress, pills scattered on the floor, the woman crying at a kitchen table, hands reaching toward her threateningly. Liam, is this your grandma? She asked carefully. He nodded once, then picked up a black crayon and drew a large X over the blonde woman's face. During lunch break, Mrs. Halverson called the number listed in Liam's emergency contacts. She expected to reach his father, Charles, but instead heard a woman's voice answer with professional smoothness. Patterson residence, this is Naomi speaking. Mrs. Patterson, this is Sarah Halverson, Liam's teacher at Lincoln Elementary. I was hoping to schedule a conference to discuss some of Liam's recent artwork. There are some themes that I find concerning. There was a pause on the other end of the line, And when Naomi spoke again, her voice had shifted to something cooler, more guarded. "Oh, Mrs. Halverson, how thoughtful of you to call. I'm afraid Liam has been going through a difficult adjustment period. His grandmother has been, well, she's been experiencing some cognitive decline, and it's been very stressful for the whole family. Children with autism often express their anxiety through their art, don't they?" Mrs. Halverson gripped the phone tighter. "I'd still like to meet with you and Mr. Patterson to discuss—" "That won't be necessary," Naomi interrupted smoothly. "Charles and I have already scheduled an appointment with a child psychologist to help Liam process these feelings. We appreciate your concern, but we prefer to handle family matters privately. I'm sure you understand." The line went dead, leaving Mrs. Halverson staring at the phone with growing unease. In her 15 years of teaching, she had never had a parent shut down communication so abruptly. She looked at Liam's drawings spread across her desk and made a decision that went against the family's wishes, but aligned with her conscience. She photocopied every single drawing and locked the originals in her filing cabinet. Then she wrote detailed notes about Liam's behavior, his increasing agitation during drop-off times, and the way he seemed to flinch whenever his stepmother's name was mentioned. The next morning, Liam arrived at school with dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept. During art time, he created another drawing that made Mrs. Halverson's heart race. An elderly woman lying in a bed, completely still, while a blonde woman stood nearby holding what looked like a cup. When she knelt beside Liam's desk, he looked up at her with eyes that seemed much older than his 6 years. "Help," he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. It was the first word she had heard him speak in weeks. Mrs. Halverson squeezed his small hand gently. "I'm going to try, sweetheart. I'm going to try." That afternoon, she spent her planning period researching adult protective services and wondering if a child's drawings could be enough evidence to save someone's life. As she looked at the pile of artwork that told a story of abuse and impending danger, she realized she might be the only adult in Liam's world who was truly listening to what he was trying to say. Outside her classroom window, storm clouds were gathering over Peoria, and Mrs. Halverson couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out for the grandmother in Liam's drawings. Dorothy's hands shook as she sat on the edge of her narrow bed. Richard's unopened letter balanced on her knees like a time bomb waiting to explode. The manila envelope had grown soft from her nervous handling over the past 2 days, but she hadn't found the courage to break the seal until now. Outside her small bedroom window, the October wind rattled the glass, and she could hear Naomi downstairs on another one of her hushed phone calls, the kind that always made Dorothy's skin crawl. The envelope crinkled as she carefully tore it open, revealing 3 pages of Richard's familiar handwriting, though his usually steady script appeared more labored, shakier, the writing of a dying man who knew his time was running out. "My dearest Charles," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means your mother is in danger and I am no longer there to protect her. What I'm about to tell you will be difficult to hear, but you must listen with an open heart and mind." Dorothy's breath caught in her throat as she continued reading. Richard's words painted a picture she had never fully understood, connecting dots she hadn't even known existed. 3 years before Naomi became your wife, she contacted a law firm in Springfield inquiring about the process of having elderly family members declared mentally incompetent. The lawyer, James Mitchell, is my old Army buddy. He called me because he was disturbed by her questions. She wanted to know about power of attorney, about involuntary commitment procedures, about how to gain control of an elderly person's assets. Dorothy's heart pounded as the implications hit her. Naomi hadn't married Charles for love. She had been planning this from the very beginning. James told me that Naomi presented herself as a concerned daughter-in-law who was worried about a grandmother with dementia. But Charles, your mother has never shown any signs of cognitive decline. Naomi was practicing learning the system, preparing for something that hadn't even happened yet. The letter continued with details that made Dorothy's stomach turn. Richard had hired a private investigator after James's call, discovering that Naomi had done this before. Her previous boyfriend in Chicago had a wealthy aunt who had mysteriously died after a fall down the stairs, leaving everything to Naomi as the woman's primary caregiver. The investigation had been dropped when Naomi moved to Illinois and changed her name from Naomi Silva to Naomi Patterson. "I wanted to tell you all of this when I was alive, son, but I was dying, and you seemed so happy. I thought maybe I was wrong. Maybe she had changed. I prayed that my suspicions were just the paranoia of a sick old man. But if you're reading this letter, It means I was right to be afraid. Dorothy's vision blurred with tears as she read Richard's final paragraphs. Your mother is the strongest woman I've ever known, Charles. She survived raising 3 children alone while I was deployed. She worked double shifts as a nurse to put you through college, and she took care of me with grace and dignity when cancer was eating me alive. Don't let that woman destroy her. Don't let her become another accident statistic. The letter ended with specific instructions. Contact James Mitchell in Springfield. Check with Adult Protective Services about previous reports. And most importantly, trust the little one. Children see what adults choose to ignore. Dorothy folded the letter with trembling hands and tucked it into her Bible alongside Liam's warning drawings. Her husband had known. Even in his final days, battling pain and medication, Richard had seen through Naomi's facade and tried to protect her. The sound of footsteps on the stairs made Dorothy quickly compose herself. She pretended to be napping when Naomi appeared in her doorway. That familiar fake smile plastered across her face. Dorothy, I brought you some tea, Naomi said, carrying a steaming mug. It's chamomile. It'll help you sleep better. Dorothy looked at the tea with new eyes, remembering Richard's words about the aunt in Chicago who had died after a mysterious fall. How many cups of tea had that woman accepted before her final night? That's very kind of you, dear, Dorothy said carefully, but I'm not thirsty right now. Naomi's smile faltered for just a moment, and Dorothy caught a flash of something cold and calculating in her eyes. Of course, Naomi said, setting the mug on the nightstand. I'll just leave it here in case you change your mind. After Naomi left, Dorothy stared at the innocent-looking cup of tea. Steam rose from its surface like ghostly fingers, and she wondered what was dissolved in the amber liquid. Instead of drinking it, she carefully poured it into the small succulent plant on her windowsill. If there was something harmful in the tea, she would know soon enough. That night, Dorothy lay awake, planning her next move. She had evidence now: Richard's letter, Liam's drawings, and her growing understanding of Naomi's true nature. But she also knew that time was running out. Every day she stayed in this house was another day closer to becoming another accident. The succulent plant on her windowsill had begun to wilt. The doorbell rang at exactly 3:47 p.m. on a Thursday afternoon, cutting through the oppressive silence that had settled over the Patterson house like a heavy blanket. Dorothy, who had been pretending to nap in her small bedroom, heard Naomi's heels clicking rapidly across the hardwood floor downstairs, followed by the unmistakable sound of panic in her daughter-in-law's voice. "Oh, Mrs. Halverson, what a surprise." Dorothy crept to her bedroom door, pressing her ear against the cool wood. She recognized the name. Liam had mentioned his teacher before, always with a fondness that suggested the woman truly understood him. "I hope I'm not intruding," came a warm, professional voice from the entryway. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by to check on Liam. He's been quite distressed at school lately, and I wanted to speak with you and Mr. Patterson about some concerns I have." "Concerns?" Naomi's voice had taken on that dangerous edge Dorothy knew so well, sweet on the surface but sharp enough to cut glass underneath. What kind of concerns? Dorothy heard the shuffling of papers and imagined Mrs. Halvorsen showing Naomi the drawings that had been troubling her. The silence that followed felt heavy with tension. "These are disturbing images, Mrs. Patterson. Liam has been drawing the same elderly woman repeatedly, always in situations of distress or danger. As his teacher, I'm obligated to investigate when a child's artwork suggests possible abuse or neglect in the home." "Oh my goodness," Naomi said, and Dorothy could picture her putting on that perfectly rehearsed expression of shock and concern. "Mrs. Halverson, I had no idea Liam was creating such imaginative stories. You see, my mother-in-law has been going through a very difficult period. She's been experiencing some cognitive decline, and frankly, she's been having delusions. Paranoid episodes where she thinks people are trying to hurt her." Dorothy's heart sank as she listened to Naomi weave her lies with the skill of a master storyteller. "We've been trying to shield Liam from the worst of it, but children pick up on stress in the household. His drawings are probably his way of processing his grandmother's episodes. Poor little thing has been so confused by her behavior." "I see," Mrs. Halverson said, though Dorothy could hear the skepticism in her voice. "Would it be possible for me to speak with Mrs. Allen directly? Just a brief conversation to assess her well-being?" "Oh, I'm afraid that's not possible today," Naomi replied quickly. "She's been having a particularly difficult week. Her doctor has prescribed complete rest. No visitors, no overstimulation. We're actually considering whether she might be better served in a specialized care facility where she can get the professional help she needs. Dorothy bit her lip to keep from crying out. Even through the closed door, she could hear her own death sentence being pronounced with casual efficiency. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of small running feet and Liam's excited voice. "Mrs. H! Mrs. H!" Dorothy heard her grandson's footsteps pounding up the stairs, and suddenly, her bedroom door burst open. Liam threw himself into her arms, his small body trembling with excitement and relief at seeing someone from the outside world who might understand what he had been trying to communicate. Before Dorothy could react, Liam had pulled a folded piece of paper from his backpack, another drawing, this one more detailed than any she had seen before. It showed the inside of their house with frightening accuracy. The kitchen where Dorothy's pills had been thrown away, the stairs where Naomi had whispered her threats, and most chilling of all, Dorothy's bedroom with a figure lying motionless on the bed while someone stood nearby holding what looked like a pillow. "Grandma," Liam whispered urgently, pressing the drawing into her hands. "Show teacher. Tell teacher." Dorothy looked into her grandson's eyes and saw a desperation that broke her heart. This little boy had been trying to save her life with crayons and construction paper, and she was the only adult who had been listening to his silent screams for help. Heavy footsteps on the stairs announced Naomi's approach, followed by Mrs. Halverson's lighter steps. Dorothy quickly tucked Liam's drawing into her Bible and composed herself just as both women appeared in her doorway. "Dorothy," Naomi said with theatrical surprise, "I thought you were resting. Mrs. Halverson, this is my mother-in-law I was telling you about." Mrs. Halverson studied Dorothy with kind but sharp eyes, clearly looking for signs of the cognitive decline Naomi had described. What she saw instead was a woman who appeared tired and stressed, but whose eyes held a clarity and intelligence that contradicted everything she had just been told. "It's lovely to meet you, Mrs. Allen," the teacher said carefully. "Liam talks about you often at school. He clearly loves you very much." Dorothy met the woman's gaze and saw understanding pass between them. The recognition that something was very wrong in this house, and that an innocent child was caught in the middle of it. The digital clock on Dorothy's nightstand glowed 2:33 a.m., when her bladder forced her from the restless sleep that had become her nightly routine. The house on Maple Street was tomb quiet, with only the gentle hum of the furnace and the occasional creak of settling wood to break the silence. Dorothy moved carefully through the darkness, her bare feet silent on the cold hardwood floor as she made her way to the small bathroom adjacent to her bedroom. After finishing her business, Dorothy opened the bathroom door and stepped into the hallway, expecting to find the same peaceful darkness she had left behind. Instead, she found herself face to face with Naomi, who stood like a sentinel in the shadows, holding a steaming mug in her perfectly manicured hands. "Oh," Dorothy gasped, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Naomi, you startled me." In the dim light filtering through the hallway window, Naomi's smile looked more like a grimace, her blonde hair loose around her shoulders instead of its usual perfect styling. She wore a silk robe that probably cost more than Dorothy's monthly Social Security check, and her feet were bare, making her approach completely silent. "I'm sorry, Dorothy," Naomi said in a voice that dripped with false concern. "I heard you moving around and thought you might be having trouble sleeping again. I made you some warm milk with honey. It's an old family recipe from my grandmother in Brazil. It'll help you sleep deeply and peacefully." Dorothy stared at the mug, remembering the chamomile tea from the previous week and how her succulent plant had withered and died within hours of being watered with it. The liquid in the cup looked innocent enough, creamy white with a slight foam on top, but something about the way Naomi held it like a priest offering communion wine made Dorothy's skin crawl. "That's very thoughtful of you, dear," Dorothy said carefully, "but I think I can manage to get back to sleep on my own." Naomi's smile never wavered, but her grip on the mug tightened. "I insist, Dorothy. You've been so restless lately, tossing and turning. Charles is worried about you. We both are. This will help you get the deep, uninterrupted rest you need." The emphasis on certain words, deep, uninterrupted rest, sent chills down Dorothy's spine. She thought about Richard's letter, about the aunt in Chicago who had died after a mysterious fall, about all the accidents that seemed to follow Naomi like a dark shadow. "Drink it while it's warm," Naomi pressed, extending the mug toward Dorothy. "It works best when it's hot." Dorothy was about to refuse again when she heard a soft footstep on the stairs. Both women turned to see Charles emerging from the shadows, his hair disheveled from sleep. wearing the old Cubs t-shirt Dorothy had bought him for his birthday 3 years ago. "What's going on?" Charles asked, squinting in the dim light. "I heard voices." Naomi's demeanor shifted instantly, her predatory intensity melting into the concerned wife and daughter-in-law act that had fooled Charles for so long. "Oh, honey, I'm sorry we woke you," she said sweetly. "Your mother was having trouble sleeping again, so I made her some warm milk. I was just trying to take care of her." Charles looked between the two women, and for a moment, Dorothy saw something flicker in his eyes. A shadow of doubt, perhaps, or the beginning of awareness. But then Naomi moved closer to him, placing her free hand on his arm in a gesture that was both affectionate and possessive. "She's been so agitated lately," Naomi continued. "Dr. Martinez said that insomnia can be a sign of advancing dementia. The warm milk should help her get the rest she needs." Dorothy watched her son's face, seeing the internal struggle playing out in his features. Charles had always been a good man, but he had also always been easily influenced by strong personalities. First by Dorothy herself when he was young, and now by the woman who shared his bed and whispered poison in his ear every night. But something was different this time. Maybe it was the late hour when people's defenses are down and truth has a way of seeping through cracks in carefully constructed facades. Maybe it was the way Naomi held the mug like a weapon, or the way Dorothy stood frozen with fear in her nightgown. Whatever it was, Charles's eyes suddenly focused on the cup in his wife's hands with an intensity Dorothy hadn't seen in years. "What's in it?" he asked quietly. "Just warm milk and honey," Naomi replied, but her voice had lost some of its smoothness. Nothing that would hurt her. Charles stepped closer, and Dorothy could see him really looking at the situation for the first time. His elderly mother cowering in the hallway, his wife insisting she drink something at nearly 3 in the morning. The strange powder residue around the rim of the mug that became visible in the better light from the stairway. At that moment, a small voice from the top of the stairs made all 3 adults freeze. "Daddy?" Liam stood on the landing above them, his dark hair sticking up at odd angles, clutching his stuffed elephant. Even in his sleepy state, his perceptive eyes took in the scene below with the same intense observation that characterized all his artwork. "Don't drink it, Grandma," the little boy said with startling clarity, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "The bad lady wants you to sleep forever." The morning sun barely pierced through the heavy curtains of the Patterson house when Charles found Naomi unconscious in their bedroom, her body sprawled awkwardly across the California King mattress they had bought just 6 months earlier. The mug from the night before sat on her nightstand, still containing traces of the milk and honey mixture she had prepared for Dorothy, along with something else that had settled at the bottom like fine sand. "Call 911, Charles shouted, his voice cracking with panic as he shook his wife's shoulders. Her skin felt cold and clammy, her breathing shallow and irregular. Dorothy appeared in the doorway, still in her nightgown, her face a mask of concern mixed with something that looked suspiciously like relief. The paramedics arrived within 8 minutes, their red and blue lights painting the quiet suburban street in emergency colors that brought curious neighbors to their windows. As they worked on Naomi, checking her vital signs and asking rapid-fire questions about what she might have ingested, Charles paced the bedroom like a caged animal. "I don't understand," he kept repeating. "She was fine last night. We went to bed normally. She seemed perfectly healthy." Detective Maria Santos from the Peoria Police Department arrived shortly after the ambulance departed, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of the scene. She was a compact woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, and she had seen enough domestic situations to recognize the undercurrents of tension that rippled through the Patterson household like fault lines before an earthquake. "Mr. Patterson," she said, notepad ready, "I need to ask you some questions about what happened here last night." Charles ran his hands through his hair, looking older than his 42 years. "We went to bed around 11. Everything was normal. When I woke up this morning, Naomi was like that, unconscious. I have no idea what could have caused it." Detective Santos turned to Dorothy, who had been sitting quietly in the corner chair, her hands folded in her lap. "Mrs. Allen, did you notice anything unusual about your daughter-in-law yesterday evening?" Dorothy hesitated, glancing at her son before speaking. "She brought me warm milk around 2:30 in the morning, said it would help me sleep better." Charles saw us in the hallway. The detective's eyebrows rose slightly. 2:30 a.m.? That's an unusual time to be preparing beverages. Did you drink the milk, Mrs. Allen? "No," Dorothy said quietly. I wasn't thirsty." Charles stared at his mother with dawning comprehension. The pieces of the previous night's encounter began falling into place with sickening clarity. Naomi's insistence that Dorothy drink the milk, the powder residue around the mug's rim, Liam's disturbing words about sleeping forever. "Detective Santos," Charles said slowly, "I think we need to test what's in that mug." While the detective collected evidence, Liam sat in his bedroom, creating what would become his final drawing of the crisis. This one showed the house again, but now there were uniformed figures walking through the rooms, and the blonde woman was lying on a bed while men in white carried her away. At the bottom of the paper, in his careful handwriting, he had written, "Grandma safe now." The lab results came back 3 hours later. The milk contained a dangerous cocktail of Naomi's own prescription medications, Ambien, Xanax, and a heart medication that could be lethal in large doses. The same combination, Detective Santos noted grimly, that had been found in the system of an elderly woman in Chicago 2 years earlier, a case that had been ruled accidental death. "Mr. Patterson," Detective Santos said as they sat in the living room that afternoon, "I need to tell you something about your wife that you're not going to want to hear." Charles listened in stunned silence as the detective revealed Naomi's true history, the suspicious death in Chicago, the pattern of targeting elderly family members, the inquiries she had made about having Dorothy declared mentally incompetent. The private investigator's report that Richard had commissioned lay spread across the coffee table, like evidence of betrayal that went back years. "She was going to kill my mother," Charles whispered, his face pale as parchment. "She's been planning this since before we got married." At that moment, Liam appeared in the doorway. No longer the silent, withdrawn child he had been for months. The crisis had somehow freed him from whatever internal prison had kept his voice locked away. "Daddy," he said clearly, walking straight to Charles and climbing into his lap. "I tried to tell you. I tried to show you in my pictures. The bad lady wanted to hurt Grandma." Charles held his son tightly, tears streaming down his face as he realized how his own willful blindness had nearly cost his mother her life. "I'm sorry, buddy. I'm so sorry I didn't listen." Liam looked up at his father with those wise, observant eyes that had seen too much for a 6-year-old. "It's okay, Daddy. Grandma's safe now. I switched the cups." The room fell silent as everyone stared at the little boy. "You what?" Dorothy asked. "When the bad lady went to get Daddy, I switched the cups," Liam explained matter-of-factly. "I gave her the one she made for you, Grandma. She drank her own poison." Detective Santos looked at the child with a mixture of admiration and concern. "Liam, how did you know to do that?" Liam shrugged, as if the answer should be obvious to any adult with half a brain. "She was trying to make Grandma sleep forever, so I made her sleep instead." 6 months later, the special education classroom at Lincoln Elementary buzzed with the quiet energy of children focused on their morning art project. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting warm rectangles across the colorful carpet where Liam Patterson sat cross-legged, a fresh box of crayons spread before him like a rainbow of possibilities. Mrs. Sarah Halverson watched from her desk as Liam worked on his latest creation, marveling at how much the little boy had changed since that terrifying October night. Gone was the haunted look that had shadowed his eyes for months, replaced by the natural curiosity and joy that should belong to every 6-year-old. He still communicated primarily through his art, but now his drawings told stories of hope instead of horror. This morning's picture showed a cozy kitchen scene. An elderly woman with silver hair sitting at a round table, smiling as she helped a small boy with his homework. Steam rose from 2 coffee cups, and through the window behind them, a bright sun shone over a garden full of blooming flowers. At the bottom of the paper, Liam had written in his increasingly confident handwriting, "Me and Grandma Dorothy in our new house." "That's beautiful, Liam," Mrs. Halvorsen said, settling into the small chair beside him. "Tell me about your picture." Liam looked up at her with eyes that had regained their childhood sparkle. "Grandma Dorothy lives with us now in Daddy's house. She helps me with my numbers, and I help her water the flowers. She says I'm the best helper she ever had." Mrs. Halvorsen smiled, remembering the terrifying collection of drawings she still kept locked in her filing cabinet. Evidence of a child's desperate attempt to save someone he loved. Those dark images seemed like artifacts from another lifetime now. Museum pieces of trauma that no longer defined this remarkable little boy. The classroom door opened, and Dorothy Allen walked in, moving with the careful grace of someone who had recently celebrated her 75th birthday. She wore a cheerful yellow cardigan that brought out the warmth in her still bright eyes, and her silver hair was styled in a neat bob that framed her face with dignity. "Grandma!" Liam jumped up and ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist in the enthusiastic hug of a child who no longer feared losing the person he loved most. "Hello, sweetheart," Dorothy said, smoothing his dark hair with a gentle hand. "Are you ready for our special afternoon?" Today was the day they had all been waiting for, the hearing where Judge Catherine Williams would formally grant Dorothy legal guardianship of Liam. Charles had requested the arrangement himself, recognizing that his mother's unwavering love and protection had literally saved both their lives. "Mrs. Halverson," Dorothy said, approaching the teacher who had become an unexpected ally in their fight for survival, "I can never thank you enough for listening when no one else would. You saw the truth in Liam's drawings when everyone else saw only the random art of an autistic child." Mrs. Halverson felt tears prick her eyes as she looked at the transformed family before her. "Liam is an extraordinary boy, Mrs. Allen. He taught me that sometimes the quietest voices carry the most important messages." As they prepared to leave for the courthouse, Liam gathered his artwork and carefully placed each drawing in his special folder. Mixed among the bright, hopeful images of their new life were a few of his older pictures, the dark warnings he had created when no adults seemed to understand the danger surrounding his grandmother. "Why do you keep those scary pictures, buddy?" Charles asked as he arrived to pick them up. Her son looked healthier than he had in years, the stress lines around his eyes softened by months of therapy, and the relief of finally understanding the truth about his marriage. "So I remember," Liam said seriously, his small fingers tracing the edge of one particularly disturbing drawing. "So I remember that sometimes grown-ups don't listen, but kids can still help. And so I remember that Grandma Dorothy never gave up, even when the bad lady tried to make her disappear." The courthouse proceedings that afternoon were a formality, but they carried the weight of redemption. Judge Williams, a kind-faced woman in her 60s, reviewed the case with the thorough attention it deserved. The evidence of Naomi's manipulation and attempted murder had been overwhelming, leading to her conviction and a 20-year prison sentence. The Chicago authorities had reopened their investigation into the suspicious death of her previous victim, bringing some measure of justice to another family that had suffered under Naomi's calculated cruelty. "This case," Judge Williams said as she signed the guardianship papers, "reminds us all that heroes come in the smallest packages. Young man," she addressed Liam directly, "your courage and observation saved your grandmother's life. You should be very proud." Liam nodded solemnly, then turned to Dorothy with a shy smile. "Can we get ice cream now, Grandma? To celebrate?" Dorothy laughed, a sound that had returned to her voice like music after a long silence. "Of course we can, sweetheart. We can get the biggest sundae they have." As they walked out of the courthouse together, Dorothy, Charles, and Liam, Mrs. Halverson watched from the gallery seats and reflected on the power of paying attention. In her filing cabinet back at school, she still had those original drawings, a reminder that sometimes salvation comes not from dramatic gestures or bold proclamations, but from a child with crayons who refuses to stop trying to communicate the truth. That evening, as Dorothy tucked Liam into his bed in their new shared home, he looked up at her with those perceptive eyes that had seen too much but somehow retained their innocence. "Grandma Dorothy," he whispered. "Yes, sweetheart? I'm glad you listened to my pictures. I'm glad you didn't give up." Dorothy kissed his forehead and smoothed his blankets, her heart full of gratitude for the extraordinary little boy who had saved her life with nothing more than construction paper and unconditional love. "Thank you for never stopping trying to tell me, Liam. Thank you for seeing me when I thought I had become invisible. Sometimes the quietest voices carry the heaviest truths, and sometimes it's the ones we overlook, the elderly, the children, the silent, who hold the power to change everything. What would you have done if you were in her place? Would you have endured in silence or found the strength to rise when no one believed you mattered? And what about the boy? Would you have noticed his drawings? Would you have seen his eyes, pleading for someone to understand what he could not say? This story isn't just about injustice. It's about listening when it's hardest, seeing when it's inconvenient, and loving even when the world turns away. If this story touched something deep in you, don't let it stop here. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And please let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your voice matters, and we're listening.